Have you ever had a moment so ordinary, so unremarkable, that you barely notice it passing, until suddenly it becomes the dividing line of your life? It's just a whisper. 3 small words spoken on an autumn afternoon that I brushed aside with a casual smile. But since that day, those words have echoed in my mind during quiet moments, a ghost of sound that refuses to fade. My name is Olivia, I'm 29, and this story begins on a golden October afternoon last year, the kind where sunlight filters through red-orange leaves, casting warm patterns on the ground, the kind of day that feels like a gift before winter arrives, the kind you'd never imagine would become the moment everything changed. I was visiting my grandfather at Cedar Oaks, the assisted living community where he'd moved 6 months earlier. It wasn't a nursing home. He was insistent about that distinction. It's for independent folks who just need a helping hand now and then, he'd explained to anyone who asked. At 82, Grandpa Will was still remarkably self-sufficient, his mind sharp as ever, though his body had begun to slow. I'd been stopping by every Sunday afternoon for our standing date, black coffee for him, despite his doctor's protests, chai latte for me, and whatever pastries looked good at the bakery near my apartment. We'd sit on his small balcony overlooking the community gardens and talk about everything and nothing. That particular Sunday I was distracted. I'd just gotten engaged the night before, and my mind was swimming with wedding plans, apartment hunting thoughts, and a looming work deadline. The visit with Grandpa was another checkbox in my crowded weekend, sandwiched between brunch with friends and dinner with my fiancé's family. "You're a million miles away today, Livy," Grandpa said, using the nickname only he ever called me. He was sitting in his favorite armchair, the one we'd brought from his old house, worn leather cracked in all the familiar places. "Sorry," I said, pulling myself back to the present. "Just a lot on my mind. That rock on your finger might have something to do with it," he observed with a wink. His eyes were still that vivid blue that all the grandkids had inherited, bright against his weathered face. I laughed and held out my hand, letting the modest diamond catch the afternoon light. "What do you think? Jamie picked it out himself. It's perfect," he said without hesitation. "Your grandmother would have approved." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the mention of Grandma Ruth hanging in the air between us. She'd been gone 5 years, but her absence still felt fresh sometimes, especially in moments like these. "Tell me about your plans," he prompted, settling back in his chair. So I did. I talked about venue ideas and color schemes, about whether Jamie and I would look for a house right away or stay in the city a few more years. Grandpa listened attentively, asking questions in all the right places, his gnarled hands curled around his coffee mug. I didn't notice the time slipping away until my phone buzzed with a text from Jamie. "Don't forget dinner at Mom's, leaving in 30. "I should get going," I said, gathering my purse and the remains of our pastries. "Jamie's mom is making her famous pot roast." Grandpa nodded, his expression flickering with something I couldn't quite read. "Of course. Don't want to keep the future in-laws waiting." I leaned down to hug him goodbye, breathing in the familiar scent of Old Spice and mint that had been his signature for as long as I could remember. His arms felt thinner around me than I remembered, but his grip was still strong. "I'll see you next Sunday," I promised, straightening up. "Maybe we can look through those old photo albums, find some inspiration for the wedding?" He smiled up at me, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That sounds nice, Livy." I was already mentally halfway out the door, running through my mental checklist of everything I needed to do before dinner. I didn't pause to wonder why his voice sounded different, why he seemed to be looking at me with such intensity, as if memorizing my face. As I reached the door, he called out softly, "Olivia?" I turned, hand on the doorknob. "Yes? Don't forget me," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. The request was so strange, so unexpected, that I didn't know how to respond. Forget him? My own grandfather? The man who had taught me to fish, to change a tire, to appreciate thunderstorms from the safety of a porch swing? It seemed impossible, absurd even. So I smiled, somewhere between confused and amused. "Don't be silly, Grandpa," I said lightly. "See you next week." And then I walked away. I remember the sound of his door clicking shut behind me, the cheerful ding of the elevator arriving, the conversation with the receptionist about the beautiful weather as I signed out in the visitor's log. Ordinary moments passing by without consequence. It wasn't until I was halfway to my car that a strange feeling washed over me. A sudden urge to turn around, to go back up to his apartment and sit a little longer, But Jamie was waiting, and I was already running late, and Grandpa would be there next Sunday, just like always. So I kept walking. The evening passed in a blur of congratulations and wedding talk with Jamie's family. His mother hugged me tightly and whispered, "I've always wanted a daughter." His father toasted us with expensive scotch. His sister immediately launched into ideas for the bachelorette party. It wasn't until late that night, lying beside Jamie in our darkened bedroom, that I thought about Grandpa again, about the strange request and the look in his eyes. "Jamie?" I whispered, not sure if he was still awake. "Hmm?" came his drowsy reply. "Do you think we should have invited Grandpa Will to dinner tonight?" "We'll have him over soon," he murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "Plenty of time for all that." "Yeah," I agreed, pushing away the nagging feeling. Plenty of time. The next morning was Monday, the start of a hectic work week. I had presentations to prepare, clients to call, emails to answer, normal life surging forward. I texted Grandpa a picture of my engagement ring in better lighting, with a message, "Official photo for your brag book. Love you." The message showed as delivered, but not read. I didn't think much of it. Grandpa wasn't the fastest with technology, despite my patient tutorials. Tuesday and Wednesday blurred together in meetings and deadlines. Thursday, I got a voicemail from Cedar Oaks while I was in a conference. Something about Grandpa not answering his door for breakfast check-in. Could I call them back when I had a chance? I meant to. I really did. But then the client meeting ran long, and afterwards there was a champagne toast for a colleague's promotion. And by the time I remembered, it was past 7, and the administrative office would be closed. "I'll call first thing tomorrow," I promised myself, setting a reminder on my phone. But the universe doesn't always wait for our convenient timing. Friday morning, my phone rang as I was stepping out of the shower. It was my father, his voice sounding strange and hollow when I answered. "Dad?" I said, immediately alert. "What's wrong?" "It's Grandpa," he said. The rest of that conversation exists in my memory as fragments, phrases that broke through the sudden roaring in my ears. "Found him yesterday afternoon. Peaceful," they said. "Had left notes for everyone." I sank to the bathroom floor, still wrapped in my towel, water dripping from my hair onto the tile. "When?" I managed to ask. "They think sometime Wednesday night," my father replied. The doctor said it would have been quick. Wednesday, while I was working late, focused on a presentation that seems utterly meaningless now. "I got a call from Cedar Oaks," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Yesterday. I was going to call back today." My father was quiet for a moment. "It wouldn't have changed anything, Liv," he said finally. He was already gone by then. "But that's not what haunts me. What haunts me is Sunday," his whispered request, the way I smiled and walked away. Later that day, once I could function again, I drove to Cedar Oaks with Jamie. They let us into Grandpa's apartment, still untouched except for what was no longer there. His coffee mug was still on the side table. His book lay open, face down on the arm of his chair. The photos of Grandma Ruth and all of us grandkids still lined the windowsill. On the kitchen counter was a stack of envelopes, each labeled with a name. Mine was on top. With trembling fingers, I opened it, already recognizing the familiar slant of his handwriting. "My dearest Livy," it began. I couldn't read further, not then. I tucked the letter into my purse and moved through the apartment in a daze, touching his things, breathing in the lingering scent of him, trying to understand how someone could be so present and so absent at the same time. It wasn't until much later, alone in my car, that I unfolded his letter again and forced myself to read his last words to me. "I've known for a while that my time is growing short," he had written. "Some things you just feel in your bones, and these old bones have been telling me to get my affairs in order." He went on to tell me how proud he was of me, how much joy I had brought into his life, how certain he was that I would build a beautiful life with Jamie. The last paragraph is the one I can recite from memory now, having read it so many times since. "I didn't want to burden you with goodbyes. You have so much joy ahead, and I've had a full life behind. But if I could ask one thing, remember our Sundays. Remember the stories I've told you. And someday, when your own grandchildren sit at your knee, share them again. That's how we live on, Livy. That's how we're never truly gone. Don't forget me, but don't mourn too long either. I'll be watching over you, just like I always have." I sat in my car and wept, the letter clutched to my chest, remembering his whispered request and my casual dismissal. "Don't forget me," as if I ever could. It's been 14 months since that autumn day. 14 months of carrying those 3 whispered words with me, turning them over in my mind during quiet moments, hearing them in the spaces between thoughts. Winter has settled in again, bringing with it the first anniversary of Grandpa's absence. The year has been marked by all the moments he's missed. My wedding last spring, where his empty seat in the front row was adorned with his favorite fishing hat and a single white rose. Thanksgiving dinner, where no one quite knew how to carve the turkey the way he always had. Christmas morning, when I found myself reaching for the phone to call him before remembering. The world has continued turning. I've changed jobs, moved into a new house with Jamie, planted a garden in the backyard. On the surface, life moves forward in its relentless way, but inside, in the quiet corners of my heart, I carry the weight of that last goodbye and all that was left unsaid. My mother noticed first. "You've been collecting his stories," she observed one afternoon, watching me carefully label a box of Grandpa's old letters and photographs. "Someone needs to preserve them," I said, not looking up from my task. She sat beside me, gently placing her hand over mine. "He wouldn't want this to consume you, Liv." But how could I explain that it wasn't consumption, but preservation? That every story remembered, every photograph labeled, every memory recorded felt like keeping a promise I had failed to acknowledge when it mattered most. Don't forget me. The irony is, I think about him more now than I did when he was alive. Every Sunday, without fail, I make myself a black coffee, despite not particularly liking it, and a chai latte. I sit on our porch if weather permits, or by the window if it doesn't, and I talk to him in my mind. I tell him about our week, about the house, about Jamie's promotion and my new project at work, about the nursery we're preparing for the baby coming in spring. Jamie understands these Sunday rituals, though I know he worries sometimes about the depth of my regret. "He knew you loved him," he reminds me often. One missed signal doesn't erase a lifetime of being there. But that's the thing about last moments. You don't recognize them as such until they've already passed. And then they take on a significance that overshadows everything that came before. I find myself hypervigilant now about goodbyes of any kind. I hug my parents longer when they visit. I tell Jamie I love him each morning before he leaves for work. I never end a phone call with, "Talk to you later" anymore. Always with "I love you" instead. My therapist, yes, I started seeing one, calls it complicated grief, intensified by the timing and that final interaction. She says I'm punishing myself for something I couldn't have known, that Grandpa's request wasn't meant to become the burden I've made it. Perhaps she's right. But understanding something intellectually doesn't always translate to feeling it emotionally. The letter wasn't the only thing Grandpa left for me. A month after, once the initial shock had subsided, my father brought over a cardboard box he'd found in Grandpa's storage unit. "It has your name on it," Dad said, setting it down on our kitchen table. "Must have been something he was saving for you." Inside was a collection of seemingly random items. His old compass from his Boy Scout days, still working perfectly. A smooth river stone, with a natural hole through the center. A wishing stone, he'd called it when I was little. The fountain pen he'd used to write letters to Grandma during his military service. A dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, his favorite novel, margins filled with his neat handwriting. And at the bottom, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. "Memories for Livy," read the first page in his unmistakable handwriting. "Stories you might want to remember someday." It was a collection of anecdotes, life lessons, and family history. Stories about his childhood during the Depression, about meeting Grandma at a USO dance in 1962, about holding me for the first time when I was born, recipes with notes about which family gatherings they were favorites at, advice about everything from marriage to changing spark plugs. The last entry was dated just 2 days before our final Sunday together. "Livy's getting married soon. Wish Ruth could see it. She'd be so proud. Wish I could be there too, but I've made my peace with that not being likely. Left her the compass today. Hope she understands the message. Even when the path isn't clear, you can still find your true north." That's what she's always been for me. One of my true norths. She just doesn't know it. I wept when I read those words, understanding finally what he'd been trying to do during those last few months. He wasn't just saying goodbye. He was ensuring that parts of him would stay with me, that his stories wouldn't be lost, that I couldn't forget him. The compass sits on my desk now, The wishing stone hangs on a silver chain around my neck. The journal occupies a special place on our bookshelf, within easy reach for days when I need to hear his voice in my head. Last month, I visited Cedar Oaks for the first time since cleaning out his apartment. I'd been avoiding it, unsure if I could bear to walk those hallways without him waiting at the end of them. But one of his old neighbors, Mrs. Chen, had reached out, saying she had something of his she thought I might want. The visit was both harder and easier than I'd expected. The place was the same beige walls, same community room where he'd played chess on Thursday afternoons, same garden where he'd grown tomatoes in the summer, but it also felt emptier somehow, despite being full of residents. Mrs. Chen was waiting for me in that same community room, a small wrapped package on the table beside her. "Your grandfather was a good man," she said, after we'd exchanged pleasantries. "He talked about you all the time." I swallowed hard. "He did?" She nodded. "Every Sunday, after your visits, he'd come down here for our evening card game. Always had a new story about something clever you'd said or done." She smiled at the memory. "That last Sunday, he told us you'd gotten engaged. He was so proud, showing off the picture you'd sent him. That last Sunday, when I'd been so distracted, so focused on everything else, when he'd known it was goodbye, and I hadn't. He asked me to give you this," Mrs. Chen continued, pushing the package toward me. "Said you might come back someday, and when you did, you should have it." With trembling fingers, I unwrapped the package. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate flowers and vines. I recognized it instantly. It had sat on his dresser for as long as I could remember, holding his cufflinks and watch. "He finished it that last week," Mrs. Chen explained. "He'd been working on it in the wood shop downstairs for months. Said it was a wedding gift." I opened the box carefully. Inside was a folded note and a small, worn photograph. The photo showed Grandpa and me on his porch swing, my 5-year-old self curled against his side as he read to me. I remembered that day, or at least I thought I did. The memory felt both vivid and distant, like something I'd seen in a dream. The note was brief. "For my Livy. Some boxes hold treasures, some hold memories. The best ones hold both. Fill this one with moments that matter. With all my love, Grandpa Will." I clutched the box to my chest, tears streaming down my face. "He knew you'd come back," Mrs. Chen said softly, and suddenly I understood something that had eluded me for over a year. Grandpa hadn't asked me not to forget him because he thought I would. He'd asked because he was entrusting me with his stories, his memories, his legacy. He wasn't afraid of being forgotten. He was passing on the responsibility of remembrance. That night, I sat on our porch swing with his journal open in my lap and his wooden box beside me. For the first time since that autumn day, I spoke to him aloud instead of in my thoughts. "I remember, Grandpa," I whispered to the evening stars. "I remember everything." The baby kicked then, a gentle flutter beneath my ribs, as if in response. I placed a hand over the spot. "Your great-grandchild is going to know you," I promised. "All your stories, all your wisdom. The way you took your coffee black even though Grandma said it would burn a hole in your stomach. How you could predict rain by the ache in your left knee. The secret ingredient in your famous chili that you swore you'd take to your grave." I smiled through my tears, though I'm pretty sure it was just cinnamon. The night air wrapped around me like an embrace, and for the first time since that whispered goodbye, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not because the grief had disappeared. It hadn't, and maybe it never would completely. But because I finally understood what he'd been trying to tell me. Remembrance isn't about clinging to what's lost. It's about carrying forward what remains. I think of his whispered request often still, but now, instead of hearing it with regret, I hear it as the gift it was meant to be, a passing of the torch, an entrusting of memories. I didn't just promise not to forget him that day. I promised, without knowing it, to become the keeper of his stories. To make sure that when my child asks where they come from, whose blood runs in their veins, whose traits they've inherited, I'll have answers richer than names and dates. I'll have compass directions and wishing stones and the wisdom of a man who knew that the most valuable thing he could leave behind wasn't money or property, but stories. "Don't forget me," he whispered, "and I never will."